sometimes profit is seen as the enemy of purpose. Um, and the more that I spend time speaking with folks in this area, the more I'm concerned about that and how we need to support purpose-driven businesses and social enterprises to specifically be focusing on generating healthy bottom lines and strong profits. And we'll go into why that is. First, I just wanted to share a little bit of background for myself. So I've spent the majority of my career at the intersection of business and social impact. Very early on, I led the creation of and ran for 6 years these large scale youth events, which were my introduction. They were called We Days. They were 18,000 person events. And it brought young people together from schools who were focused on making a difference. They couldn't buy a ticket. They had to earn their way in by committing to local actions and international actions. And we got them excited to come by coming to see somebody like Justin Bieber, but had them leaving passionate about having heard from Malala or Archbishop Desmond Tutu or the Dalai Lama speak, which really engaged in that space. And then I spent 10 years as the executive director of a social enterprise called Meet a We. And in that 10-year period, we were able to grow our revenue about 5.5 times. In that process, learned about the importance of profitability when we picked up investors and the need to pay back. And we grew to about a size of about a 40 million P&L, which was great and fascinating. We worked in travel and in retail, and also designed our value chains very much to impact people. So at our peak, we employed 1,400 women in rural Kenya, building beautiful beadwork that we could pay 2.2 times what was considered fair wage. And then most recently, I founded Mighty Hum, which is a consultancy that's focused on helping CEOs unlock the exhilarating experience of running high performing organizations. And we've had a chance to work with a whole series of groups, and in many cases, those are impact driven businesses that we're working with. Now, for myself, I've spent in the last 2 years, I've actually spoken to over 200 social entrepreneurs and leaders of purpose-driven businesses. About 180 of those have been in formal interview format. And one of my big takeaways is that I'm deeply concerned about the challenges facing the social enterprise sector and the mindset within the social enterprise sector. And I'm also deeply inspired by the birth of the purpose-driven business, which we will talk a little bit about today as well. I want to ground us in the reminder of what social enterprise was meant to be for the world. It was meant to be a solution to a limitation of charity. That this idea is that we could create businesses that would drive solutions for very important issues in the world by being financially self-sufficient, that they would be able to use business to scale impact, they would increase innovation and efficiency, and drive systematic change. So the idea that a business in the space that was also designed to do good would influence other businesses that weren't social enterprises to think about how they could change their value chain and the way that they impacted their community and the environment. Now, the reality is that when we take a step back and we look what's going on with social enterprise, it's not achieving the big vision that we had hoped. And I had written this in the article. If your social enterprise can't survive without grants, don't kid yourself, you're running a charity. And it's a provocative statement, but it is some of what we're seeing. You know, we thought social enterprises were meant to solve the world's most pressing problems at scale. They're failing to deliver at that promise. There's a high reliance on grants. There's very limited R&D, a lot of challenges with staff being overburdened and feeling like they're working over capacity and dealing with burnouts. Many groups can't access loans or attract investors. And what we're seeing is a lot of social enterprises are stalling in their ability to drive impact before it even starts, meaning that they're staying quite small. And I'll share with you some of the data that we're seeing with this. So let's look at the current state. So there was this great survey that was done in Canada in 2023 from a group called Buy Social Canada. They reached out to 132 social enterprises to survey them to understand how various different elements of how they were doing. The first one that I will hit on is financial health. And what you would see is that only 11% of social enterprises identified themselves as profitable. The other 89% marked themselves as marginally profitable, break even, losing money, or significantly losing money. Now, this is a big challenge for the sector, and it in conversations that we've had with some growing organizations, we've actually brought in banks to have conversations with them. And a common thing that we hear from some of these organizations is that if I could just get a bank loan, I would be able to grow my business. Which, in turn, in what I'm actually hearing when they say that is that if I could just get a loan, it would fix the fact that my fundamentals in the business aren't working properly. And Samuel Wright, who's the vice president at Huntington Bank, came in and spent some time with some organizations that we're working with. And he said the most fascinating thing: as a bank, we're not in the business of saving companies. We provide loans to businesses with a proven track record of profitability, because that's what gives us confidence that they can pay us back. And I think that is the mindset change that we need to start to see with social enterprise and purpose-driven businesses, is that the fundamentals in the business need to be strong so they can access capital and investors. The other piece that we're seeing is low profit is affecting size and reach. So 63% of the social enterprises surveyed said that their scope of operations were limited to one neighborhood or one city. So they're very narrow in their reach. And over 54% had less than 15 employees. Some of the majority of them are quite small or considered micro in size. And I should qualify that not all some social enterprises are specifically designed for very narrow impact and are not designed for scale, which is okay. There's a spot for that in place too. Um, but I think for the most part, we're quite concerned about the sector of social enterprise. So I just want to also pause for a minute and talk about what it can feel like for leaders in those businesses. And as I say these, if any of you have worked in the nonprofit space, you can nod your heads if this sounds a lot like what it sounds like when you work at a charity, which is they're saying that they're under resourced and their staff are stretched and overworked and they're dealing with burnout. They're grant dependent, meaning that although they're revenue generating and aiming to drive profits, they're actually needing additional funding to stay alive, and they're not certain about the dependability of that funding, and they're unable to scale. They're really struggling to figure out how they can get traction to achieve what they want to achieve. The other piece that I would add in there is that they're also really struggling to have space to innovate. And if any of you have worked in a business that has been struggling or in a charity, you would recognize some of those feelings. And some of the things that we kind of miss when we speak about these is some of the things that are actually really important. So, like when you have solid profit and you are making a mistake with a customer and you have to course correct, you actually have margins that you can apply to do right by the customer. When you're running a break even business, that feels like a very difficult decision to make. You feel like you can innovate. You feel like you can put money behind the future of what you want to develop with your organization to improve impact or improve scale, whatever it may be. You don't feel like that when you're inside of a break even business. But there are social enterprises that are doing very well. Thrive Market, Someone Somewhere, Bob and Gona. And there are things that we can learn from these groups that are important. So number one, when you see these organizations, one of the clearest things that you'll see is a very strong focus on financial viability. Two is a focus on customer needs first. And this is one of the other things that we often see with social enterprises and purpose-driven businesses that struggle, is the thing that brings them to work every day, the thing that warms their heart is their impact. And they want to lead by talking to their customer base about what their impact is. But in reality, they need to be focused on the customer needs first and making sure that they're solving for that. And then the final thing that we're seeing is that the most effective purpose-driven businesses are integrating impact into their value chain versus a give back model at the end. There are give back models that have worked. I think we're all familiar with the scope of Tom Shoes. I think at its peak reached 300 million in revenue. I'm not sure that the impact model for Tom Shoes was as effective as it could be, but just to say a buy one, give one type of model has succeeded in the past. But the ones that do it best have it integrated. And I'll use Someone Somewhere as an example. They're a Mexican based um, textiles company, and they have three levels of impact. So the first is they will take clothing and recycle it back down, turn it back into thread. So that's one impact. So recycled goods. The second is that they send that thread to Mexican artisans who, on average, in Mexico live below the poverty line. They're able to pay them a fair wage, and they take that uh, the inputs and turn it back into fabric, beautiful fabric, and then they send it to Someone Somewhere's factory, where textile workers are the other underpaid category in Mexico, and they are able to pay them a fair wage. And they take that fabric and then turn it into product like backpacks, watch straps, so on and so forth. And so they have three levels of impact, but part of what's really powerful about what they're doing is that their impact is integrated into their value chain. So internally in the organization, they can focus singularly on the customer and making sure that they deliver for the customer. And they know that the more that they deliver for the customer and the better job that they do that, the greater impact that they will have. So that's a commonality that we see in those groups. So I also want to highlight, and this came across in the article, that social enterprises, I believe, are falling behind a new category of what we see as purpose-driven businesses. These are entrepreneurs who have come up in a world where making a difference matters, and they're thinking about the world and their impact on the world, and they're launching businesses where this is integrated in it. And there are so many examples. I just have logos of some, and some of them are very large, like AMP Robotics, I think is over 80 million in revenue. Appeal Sciences is valued at, I think, over $500 million in their last round of funding. Gen Phoenix and Everdriven is, I think, over $200 million in revenue. So we're starting to see some very big organizations exist there. And we're also seeing very appealing startups and organizations that are early stage and progressing well. Now, in the conversations that I had, I actually spent some time talking to some of these founders about why did you skip being a social enterprise? Why didn't you choose to become a social enterprise? And we heard some very interesting things. The first was around funding. So I've got two quotes here. You're less interesting from an investment perspective. Second quote was, finding funding would have been harder because you get categorized as a not-for-profit and funders don't believe you'll drive a return. I thought that was interesting. Second one was around generating wealth. Multiple of these founders spoke about this, that profit creates options. It's only been since I was born that women could have their own checking accounts in this country. And the second quote, profit allows me the opportunity for me and my kids to have the wealth I want to have. And I think what's interesting to also think about is how hard it is to build a successful company. And this idea of making sure that a founder who is driving that and their employees can benefit from generating wealth is important. It's a really important part of the formula. Because let me tell you, it can suck sometimes running an organization. It is really hard, and you want those people to sustain through it and drive through it. And then the last piece was around capturing businesses. I've worked in social enterprise before. You often get labeled as a nonprofit, which makes it hard to be taken seriously when trying to do business with corporations. I saw the label as a hindrance. And when I asked this fellow a little bit more about it, he said when he worked at the social enterprise, they, instead of going to being able to speak to procurement, they keep getting pushed off to the CSR team, when in reality, they wanted to be working with procurement. So I do want to highlight some of the key commonalities that show up from purpose-driven businesses. just so we can see some of the things that are in parallel and why I think that this is a very exciting group to see. So the first is just like social enterprises, we see impact is integrated into their missions. It's not a CSR thing on the side. This is in their core purpose. The second is, we spoke about this, building wealth is important to the founders. And of course, that is, I believe wealth generation is very important part of progressing society. It is also a very important part for investors to see because they too are in it to generate returns. Access to capital and investors as at the core of their approach. All of the successful groups I spoke to were designing around how they could access capital, whether it be loans or investor money. And they're designing for scale, which is quite exciting. So I'll just leave you with this last thought that had been shared in the article. Social enterprises were born from a desire to do good, but good intentions aren't enough. To truly address the world's most pressing challenges, the sector must embrace a new paradigm where profit and purpose coexist. The death of a traditional social enterprise isn't something to mourn, it's an opportunity to innovate, evolve, and build businesses that can change the world and endure. The purpose driven business could be that evolution, a model built not on compromise, but on the conviction that profit and purpose can scale together.